I stood on the stage beneath a cascade of warm lights, the applause echoing through the grand ballroom like thunder I couldn't quite feel. The Apex Award gleamed in my hands, heavier than I had imagined, a crystal monument to years of labor, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. For any designer, this moment was the pinnacle, the kind of recognition that could launch a career into history books. Yet as the crowd clapped and cheered, my eyes searched the front row for faces that weren't there. The seats I had reserved sat empty, their name cards tucked neatly in place as though mocking me. My family had promised me they would come. They had told me with the faintest tone of enthusiasm that this time they would be there. And then, only 2 days before, they had traded my triumph for a last-minute vacation in the Bahamas. The applause finally dimmed, and I forced a smile as I stepped from the stage. My colleagues rose to meet me, their faces lit with genuine pride, their words tumbling out in congratulations. But their warmth, kind as it was, couldn't fill the hollow ache in my chest. My family's absence wasn't just a disappointment, it was a wound reopening, the same one they had carved year after year with forgotten birthdays, missed graduations, and minimized milestones. I held the award close to my chest as if clutching it tighter could quiet the storm of abandonment boiling inside me. As the ballroom began to hum again with chatter, a hand brushed mine. Startled, I turned to find an elderly man standing just beside the stage exit. His suit was finely cut, his posture erect despite his years, and his eyes seemed to hold the sharpness of someone who had spent a lifetime truly seeing the world. Without a word, he pressed something small and metallic into my palm. The object was cool, almost icy against my skin. A brass key, antique in design with intricate teeth and a strange spiral symbol engraved on its head. "Welcome home," he whispered, his voice gentle but weighted with meaning I couldn't yet grasp. His smile carried the kind of familiarity that unsettles and comforts in equal measure. Before I could ask who he was or what he meant, he was gone, slipping into the thinning crowd like a shadow dissolving into light. I stood frozen, the key glinting under the ballroom's golden glow. My mind spun. Home? What home could he be referring to? My own family had proven once again that home was never where they were. And yet, something about the object pulsed with possibility, as if it held an answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask. The spell was broken by the sudden vibration of my clutch bag. I pulled out my phone, expecting maybe a perfunctory text from my parents. Instead, the screen screamed in bold numbers, 66 missed calls. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the caller IDs, my mother, my father, my brother, my sister. All of them. Over and over, desperate attempts to reach me. Confusion and dread collided in my chest. What could possibly warrant this avalanche of calls from the very people who had chosen sandy beaches over my defining night? Was this sudden urgency genuine concern or just another demand that I drop everything for them? The bitter irony clawed at me. I had begged them to be here, to stand by me, and they hadn't. And now, as I stood alone with my award in one hand and an enigmatic key in the other, they were suddenly frantic to get my attention. I glanced back at the stage, still glowing in memory with the ovation of strangers. For years, I had dreamed of my family sitting there, clapping proudly, acknowledging my worth without conditions. Instead, the night had unfolded differently, painfully, yes, but also with a thread of mystery woven through it. The applause of strangers, the key from a legend. I barely recognized 66 calls from the people who had failed me when it mattered most. Somewhere between the hollow roar of applause and the buzz of my phone, I knew the night wasn't over. Something had shifted, something irreversible, and the weight of that key in my hand suggested that the story ahead would open doors I had never imagined existed. Long before the Apex Award, long before the mysterious key pressed into my palm, the story of being unseen had already been written into me. I grew up in a picture-perfect suburban neighborhood just outside Boston. Ours was the kind of house that belonged on glossy postcards, a colonial-style home with a manicured lawn, symmetrical shutters, and flower beds my mother tended like they were part of her own reputation. From the outside, we were the model of success. Inside, the rules of love were as calculated and rigid as an accounting ledger. My father, Richard Thompson, was a man who measured life in numbers. He had built his accounting firm from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most respected in New England. For him, worth was quantifiable, proof was balance sheets and bottom lines. My mother, Elizabeth, ran a luxury real estate business, selling dreams in the form of homes to Boston's elite. Together, they embodied the American dream, self-made, polished, admired. Success wasn't just encouraged in our family, It was required the baseline standard before love or pride were doled out in tiny conditional rations. But even in a home built on achievement, there was an unspoken hierarchy. At the top sat my brother, David. He was the golden child, shielded and celebrated, though his accomplishments rarely matched the fanfare. David could bring home report cards filled with C's, and my parents would gush as if he had scaled Everest. I, on the other hand, earned straight A's and perfect marks only to receive a distracted nod. The imbalance wasn't subtle, it was the air we breathed. When David made junior varsity basketball, my parents threw a backyard barbecue, inviting neighbors, relatives, and colleagues to celebrate. When I was chosen at 16 for a prestigious young artist program, the kind that only admitted a handful of students nationwide, they forgot to attend my exhibition. The contrast was so sharp it burned, but I learned to swallow it, to pretend the absence didn't matter. Then there was Heather, my younger sister. She was clever in her own way, not in her achievements, but in her survival strategy. Heather had figured out early that the simplest path through our family dynamic was mimicry. She dressed like my mother, spoke like her, followed her into real estate without ever questioning if it was her true calling. Where I resisted, fought, and strove to be seen on my own terms, Heather became their mirror. For that, she was rewarded with affection, approval, and the illusion of harmony. I took a different route. I believed with a kind of naive stubbornness that if I just worked harder, achieved more, became undeniably excellent, then they would have no choice but to see me. I poured myself into graphic design, sketching until my fingers cramped, pushing through every assignment like it was a chance to finally earn their pride. Every accolade I collected was supposed to be the key to their recognition, but no matter how high I climbed, they shifted their gaze elsewhere, always finding David's minor crises or Heather's small successes more worthy of their attention. High school graduation was my first brutal confirmation. I was valedictorian, standing at the podium, my speech carefully written and rehearsed. From the stage, I saw my parents in the audience, not watching me, but checking their watches, whispering to each other. The moment the ceremony ended, they rushed off to attend David's fundraiser for a service trip he would later abandon. And halfway through, I told myself college would be different. It wasn't. When I graduated summa cum laude from the Rhode Island School of Design, my mother criticized my outfit, calling it unprofessional. While my father spent the ceremony answering work emails, every milestone in my life seemed to be eclipsed by their neglect. Vacations were booked during my birthdays, holidays passed with thoughtless gifts that showed no recognition of who I really was. They weren't cruel in the traditional sense, they never yelled, never struck me, never withheld basic comforts, but their neglect cut deeper than anger ever could. It told me over and over that I wasn't worth showing up for, that I could achieve greatness, but without their attention, it was reduced to background noise. By the time I was an adult, the pattern was undeniable. I wasn't the child they rallied around or mirrored themselves in. I was the one they overlooked, the one they expected to be self-sufficient to succeed without applause. And yet, I kept striving as though one day they might finally break the pattern and truly see me. What I didn't know then was that their blindness would shape me into someone capable of finding belonging elsewhere. But before that revelation came, I had to keep learning the same painful lesson, my soul, again and again. By the time I was 5 years out of college, I had carved out a career that looked respectable from the outside. Horizon Creative, a boutique design agency in Boston, had become my professional home. I started there as a junior designer, wide-eyed and eager, the kind of employee who stayed late and came in early just to prove myself. While others slipped out at 5, I lingered in the glow of my computer screen, adjusting lines, colors, and textures until they finally felt right. I wasn't just designing for clients, I was designing for the invisible audience of my parents, hoping that each polished project might be the one that finally earned their unqualified pride. The work was good. My portfolio grew stronger with each campaign, but I knew I needed something bigger. Not just another client pleased with a logo refresh, but a project that would put my name on the map. That chance arrived in the form of a national hotel chain looking to rebrand its luxury line. The brief was ambitious. They wanted bold, modern, and timeless, something that would distinguish them in a saturated market. For 3 relentless months, I lived and breathed that project. My apartment became a second studio, the walls pinned with sketches and mood boards, the floor littered with test prints. I fused hand-drawn artistry with digital precision, layering humanity into sleek modernity. Every curve, every color choice carried the weight of both my passion and my hunger for recognition. When the campaign finally launched, it exceeded even my own hopes. The client reported a 20% increase in bookings within the first quarter. Industry publications picked it up, praising the originality and execution. Then came the letter. A nomination for the Apex Award, the highest honor in my field, reserved for designs that shifted the industry forward. My hands trembled as I read it, the words blurring through tears. Previous winners had gone on to launch their own studios, publish books, even become household names in design. This wasn't just another milestone. This was the culmination of every late night, every sacrifice, every moment I had endured feeling unseen. And for the first time, I dared to hope my parents would see it too. I picked up the phone immediately. My mother answered, her voice as brisk and distracted as ever. "That's wonderful, honey," she said, the clatter of her keyboard audible in the background. I told her the ceremony date, September 15th, a Friday evening at the Grand Meridian Hotel, and that I had 2 extra tickets set aside for them. "Let me check the calendar," she replied. And after a pause, she confirmed, "Yes, I think that should work. Your father has a conference that week, but he'll be back Thursday night. We'll make it happen." For the first time in my adult life, I believed them. I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to walk on stage and see their faces in the crowd. I bought a midnight blue gown that made me feel radiant, my auburn hair and pale skin glowing against its deep shade. I practiced my acceptance speech, careful to strike a balance between humility and pride. Every word was a prayer that this time, finally, my parents would be present for me. 2 days before the ceremony, I called to finalize the details, eager to hear their excitement. Instead, my mother's voice came flustered, uneasy. "Oh, Audrey, I meant to call you. Something's come up." My stomach clenched before she even explained. "Your brother has been under so much stress with his new position. He needs a break, poor thing. We decided the family should take an emergency vacation to the Bahamas." Her words hung heavy, suffocating. "What about the ceremony?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, Heather's coming too, of course. David needs all our support right now. I'm sure you understand. This work promotion has been so hard on him." The familiar ice spread through my chest, disappointment trickling through every vein. I wanted to scream. Instead, I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my voice trembling but even. "Mom, this ceremony is the biggest moment in my career so far. I told you about it months ago." "There will be other ceremonies, honey. Family comes first, you know that." And just like that, the fragile hope I had nurtured collapsed. The night before the ceremony, I sat in my apartment staring at the navy blue gown draped across my chair. It should have felt like a symbol of triumph, a garment for a night that would mark my arrival as a force in my industry. Instead, it felt like a costume for an act no one I loved would be there to witness. My phone lay silent on the table. No apology from my parents, no acknowledgement of what they were missing. Just the echo of my mother's words. There will be other ceremonies, family comes first. Family had always come first, but not mine. David's needs came first. Heather's ease came first. My father's career came first. My mother's reputation came first. I had been taught year after year that I would always come last, and now, even on the eve of my greatest achievement, the pattern had repeated itself as though carved into stone. I cycled through the familiar stages. Disbelief, anger, grief. I wanted to call them again, to beg, to demand, to make them understand, but I already knew how that conversation would end. With me feeling small, unreasonable, selfish for wanting a fraction of their attention. So instead, I sat in the silence and made a decision. I would not let their absence define the moment. I would stand on that stage regardless, with or without them. The morning of the ceremony, the city was bathed in perfect early autumn light. Crisp air, golden leaves, a sky as clear as glass. It should have been a day to savor. Instead, I felt hollow, going through the motions of hair and makeup like a soldier preparing for battle. When the rideshare car pulled up to the Grand Meridian Hotel, I watched families stream inside, mothers adjusting ties, fathers offering proud embraces, siblings snapping photos in front of the grand entrance. Each one a reminder of what I didn't have. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and chatter. My agency director, Sophia, beamed when she saw me. "Audrey, you look stunning," she said, her hand resting on my shoulder with warmth. Beside her, her husband smiled, the picture of partnership and support. It turned her smile, though it felt brittle. "Thank you. You both look wonderful, too." Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the table she'd reserved. "Where's your family? I saved seats for them." They had a last-minute emergency, I lied, the words sharp on my tongue. A vacation they couldn't reschedule. Sophia frowned, but she didn't press. That timing is unfortunate. Unfortunate. The word barely scratched the surface of what it felt like to sit at a table lined with my colleagues and their loved ones while the chairs reserved for my family sat empty. The printed name cards with Richard Thompson and Elizabeth Thompson mocked me until I tucked them discreetly into my clutch, as if hiding them could hide the ache. Dinner was served, courses as elegant as the setting, but my appetite had vanished. I pushed the dessert around my plate as the host began announcing awards for typography, web design, breakthrough new talent. Winners walked the stage, flanked by cheering families, embraced by spouses, showered in camera flashes. I applauded mechanically, my chest tight with each reminder of what I lacked. Then came the words I had been waiting for. The Apex Award for Revolutionary Design Innovation. My category, my moment. My heart pounded as highlight reels of the nominees played across towering screens. My hotel rebrand appeared in full glory, drawing murmurs of appreciation from the audience. The winner of this year's Apex Award is... The pause felt endless. Audrey Thompson for the Azora Hotel Collection rebrand. The room erupted. My colleagues leapt to their feet, clapping with genuine joy. The sound filled the space, but not the hollow inside me. My legs trembled as I stood, smoothing my gown, forcing a smile as I walked to the stage. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, and in every version, I saw my parents' faces shining in the crowd. Instead, I looked out into a sea of strangers, their applause loud but unfamiliar, the cry. Stahl trophy was placed in my hands, gleaming under the spotlight. It was everything I'd worked for, sure. And yet, in that instant, it was also a mirror reflecting what I lacked. A validation that meant so much, shadowed by those who had chosen sunlit beaches over me. I lifted the microphone, steadying my voice. I had written my speech to thank my family first, but as the words formed, I pivoted. Instead, I thanked my mentors, my colleagues, my professors, even the first client who had believed in me. Not once did I mention the people who had chosen absence. The audience rose in a standing ovation. My eyes blurred with tears. This was the night I should have shared with the people who raised me. But they weren't here. And as I walked off that stage, the applause crashing around me, I knew the wound of their absence would shape what came next. The applause still rang in my ears as I stepped off the stage, the heavy crystal award cradled in my hands like both a crown and a burden. My colleagues gathered around me, their cheers warm and genuine, their pride untainted by family obligation. Yet even as I smiled and thanked them, my heart beat with a hollow rhythm. They were not the ones I had saved seats for. They were not the ones I had dreamed of locking eyes with from the podium. The ballroom sparkled with celebration, glasses clinking, cameras flashing, laughter swelling in pockets across the room. For everyone else, it was a night of triumph shared with spouses, parents, siblings, entire tables alive with support. For me, it was a night of triumph shadowed by empty chairs and name cards stuffed away in my clutch. I wandered toward one of the tall windows, staring out at the Boston skyline glittering against the night. Skyscrapers stood proud as though mocking the fragility inside me. Quite a view, isn't it? A voice said beside me. I turned to find an elderly man, tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. His silver hair framed a face lined with experience, and his blue eyes gleamed with a clarity that unnerved me. There was something commanding yet gentle about him, as though he carried decades of wisdom in his gaze. Yes, I managed, grateful for the distraction from the ache in my chest. He extended his hand. Harold Wilson. The name made my breath catch. Harold Wilson was a legend in the design world, a pioneer whose work in the 70s and 80s had transformed the very landscape of commercial art. His pieces weren't just admired, they were studied, revered, imitated for generations. And now here he was, standing beside me as casually as if we'd known each other for years. Audrey Thompson, I replied, my voice unsteady as I shook his hand. I'm such an admirer of your work. Please, call me Harold, and I know who you are. His smile deepened. Your hotel rebranding was brilliantly executed. You deserved that award tonight. For a moment, I forgot the empty seats, forgot the gnawing pain. Praise from Harold Wilson himself felt almost surreal, like a validation more profound than the trophy in my hands. We spoke for half an hour, though it felt like minutes. He asked questions about my creative process, not the shallow kind that people pose for politeness, but the kind that revealed true curiosity. He listened intently, nodding, sometimes smiling with recognition as though my struggles mirrored his own past. He shared snippets of his career, the risks he took, the criticism he faced, the moments he nearly gave up. Never once did he diminish the pain of my family's absence, nor did he offer hollow reassurances. He simply acknowledged what I admitted quietly. They were supposed to be here. They chose not to be. When the ballroom began to empty, Harold reached into his pocket. "I believe this belongs to you," he said softly, pressing something cold into my palm. I opened my hand to see an antique brass key, its teeth oddly shaped, its head etched with a spiral-like symbol I didn't recognize. It was heavier than I expected, its weight disproportionate to its size. "What is this, Ashay?" I asked, bewildered. Harold's eyes crinkled with warmth, his smile tinged with mystery. "Welcome home," he said simply. Then he handed me a business card named address in downtown Boston with the words "Tomorrow evening, 8 p.m." printed in elegant script. That key will open more than just a door. Before I could respond, he slipped away, moving with surprising ease for a man his age, leaving me with more questions than answers. I stared down at the key, turning it over in my palm, the engraved spiral catching the light. It felt like an invitation, like a secret meant only for me. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the moment. I pulled it out, my stomach lurching as the screen lit up. 66 missed calls. The names of my family filled the log. My mother, my father, David, Heather. Dozens of attempts, one after another, like an alarm I hadn't heard. I froze, the crystal award heavy in one hand, the key pressing into the other, the phone vibrating again with relentless urgency. What could possibly have driven them to call me like this on the very night they had abandoned me? Standing in the dimming light of the ballroom, I realized that my life, was about to shift. The applause of strangers, the validation of a legend, the mystery of a key, and the desperate calls of the family who had chosen absence. All of it collided in a single moment that I knew would mark the dividing line between everything I had been and everything I was about to become. Back in my apartment, I set the award on the kitchen counter, its crystalline edges catching the lamplight like a beelight. Egan, I didn't yet know how to feel about. My clutch still buzzed with incoming notifications, the phone refusing to let me have even one quiet moment of triumph. I finally unlocked it, my breath catching at the sight. 66 missed calls. Scrolling, I saw the pattern. 20 from my mother, 15 from my father, the rest split between David and Heather. It was almost laughable. The very people who couldn't spare a single evening for me had somehow managed to flood my phone with desperate urgency. My inbox groaned under the weight of voicemails and texts. I played the first message. My mother's voice was sharp with panic. "Audrey, call me immediately. David has had a severe allergic reaction. We're at the hospital. Call me back." The second, left half an hour later, was even more frantic. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Your brother is in serious condition. They think it was something in the seafood platter at dinner. Call me back right now." My pulse quickened, but before I could react, the third voicemail came through, her tone already shifting from fear to accusation. "Audrey Elizabeth Thompson, I cannot believe you are ignoring us during a family emergency. What could possibly be more important than your brother's health? Call me back this instant." By the final message, left only 20 minutes earlier, her voice cracked with tears, weaponizing vulnerability. "I just don't understand how you could be so selfish at a time like this. We are all here worried sick about David, and you can't even bother to answer your phone. I thought we raised you better than this." The text messages told the same story. Frantic updates, emotional manipulation, guilt-laced commands. According to Heather's last text, David was stable, but they wanted me to fly to Nassau immediately. I sank onto the edge of my bed, gown still clinging to me, makeup smudged from the night's weight. The irony struck hard. For years, I had dropped everything at the first sign of crisis, racing to play the responsible daughter, the reliable sister, the one who patched every crack. But tonight, the night I had begged them to show up for me, they had chosen palm trees and cocktails. And now they demanded I abandon my moment for theirs. My thumb hovered over the call button, the familiar pattern tugging at me. Apologize, book the first flight out, sit at David's bedside while my own achievement faded into silence. But something in me resisted. Maybe it was the weight of the Apex trophy, proof of my worth. Maybe it was the brass key still warm in my palm, a reminder that someone else had seen me clearly tonight. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion, years of bending finally snapping. Instead of calling my mother back, I dialed the hospital in Nassau directly. After verifying my identity, I was connected to David's physician. Calmly, he explained that while the reaction had been severe, David had been stabilized quickly and was no longer in danger. They planned to keep him overnight for observation, but he was expected to be discharged by noon the next day. Relief swept over me, tempered by anger. So the emergency, the storm of missed calls and guilt, wasn't life or death. It was an inconvenience wrapped in drama, one more excuse for my family to demand my sacrifice. I texted Heather. Just seeing these messages now, is David stable? Her reply came almost instantly. Yes, he's fine. They're keeping him overnight. Mom is freaking out and wants you here ASAP. I exhaled, a strange calm filling me. For the first time, I saw the pattern for what it was. Not my duty, not my obligation, but a cycle I had the power to interrupt. I booked a flight for the following afternoon, not morning. For once, I would not leap at their command. I would give myself this one night to breathe, to honor what I had accomplished. Oh night, for the first time in my life, I would put myself first. The following evening, I stood before a weathered brick building in Boston's historic warehouse district, clutching the brass key Harold had pressed into my palm. The sun had dipped low, bathing the street in amber light, but the building itself looked ordinary. Red bricks faded by time, arched windows clouded with age, a heavy wooden door at street level. Nothing about it suggested significance. If not for Harold's business card with this very address printed neatly across it, I might have walked past without a second thought. I ran my thumb across the engraved spiral on the key, hesitating. What did welcome home even mean? My real home, if I could call it that, was in chaos, buzzing with calls and messages that accused me of being selfish while my brother slept safely in a hospital bed. I could have gone straight to the airport, caught the earliest flight to Nassau, resumed the pattern I'd played for decades, but something in me resisted. Something whispered that if I didn't turn this key, I'd regret it. I checked the street. Empty. With a steadying breath, I slid the key into what I thought was a decorative lock beneath the modern keypad. To my shock, it fit perfectly. With a click and a subtle shifting of hidden mechanisms, the door swung inward without a sound. Heart pounding, I stepped inside. The air was cooler, tinged with the faint scent of wood polish and ink. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, ending at another door faintly lit by a single wall sconce. Behind it came the low hum of voices, faint music, the unmistakable energy of people at work. I pushed it open, and my breath caught. The space was vast, an enormous open-concept studio carved out of what must have been several combined warehouses. Sunlight poured in through towering windows masked from the street outside, bathing the room in golden warmth. High ceilings stretched overhead, beams exposed. Like the skeleton of an ancient cathedral, and everywhere, there was creation. One corner housed antique printing presses, their massive wheels gleaming beside sleek modern machines. Another was lined with digital workstations, screens glowing with the light of cutting-edge design software. A photography area buzzed with shutter clicks. Easels stood ready with half-finished canvases. Clay spun on pottery wheels. Even a small stage had been erected, its curtain half drawn, instruments resting nearby. But what struck me most weren't the tools, it was the people. 30, maybe 40 individuals moved fluidly through the space. Artists, designers, photographers, musicians, sculptors. Some worked alone, deeply focused. Others collaborated in small groups, their conversations alive with passion and exchange. The atmosphere hummed with creative energy, the kind I had only ever felt in fleeting bursts. Here, it was constant, tangible, electric. "You found us!" Harold's familiar voice called. I turned to see him approaching, now dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down. The elegance was still there, but softened as though this space allowed him to shed the armor of the outside world. "I almost didn't come," I admitted, my voice low. "My family..." He raised a hand gently, not dismissing but pausing my thought. "And yet you're here. That says something, doesn't it?" I followed him deeper inside, still reeling. "What is this place?" "We call it the Collective," Harold explained. "It's been many things over the decades, but always this at its core, a community for creatives who were talented, driven, but somehow alone. We believe in collaboration over competition, in building each other up rather than tearing down. Here, your vision is seen, and your humanity too. We paused before a wall covered in framed artwork, photographs, sketches, graphic pieces. Spanning generations, I recognized some instantly, works by artists I had studied in school, iconic designs that had shaped entire industries. My stomach flipped as I realized what this meant. These people were members, I whispered. Harold smiled. Our members. Once you're part of the collective, you're never truly gone. Every one of them once stood where you stand now, hungry, unseen, desperate for a place to belong, and each found it here. I followed him to a quieter corner where a group sat around a long table, their faces turning toward me with curiosity but not judgment. Everyone, Harold announced warmly, this is Audrey Thompson, our newest Apex winner. Introductions followed, a photographer whose work I'd admired in glossy magazines, a typographer whose innovations shaped the digital world, an architect known for sustainable designs. Each greeted me not as a competitor or stranger, but as though I were already one of them. We spoke about my hotel rebrand. They had seen it, studied it, admired the choices I had made. Their questions weren't shallow compliments, they were insightful, layered, appreciative of the nuance I had poured into my work. For the first time, my creative language wasn't met with blank stares or distracted nods. It was understood, celebrated, expanded upon. As the evening unfolded, I realized the truth. This was what Harold meant by welcome home. Not the house where my parents minimized me, not the family that forgot me, but here, in this hidden warehouse pulsing with creativity and belonging. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Truly seen. And as I touched the key in my pocket, I knew this was the door I had been waiting to unlock my entire life. The flight to Nassau was a blur, my mind split between the glow of the collective and the looming weight of my family. The brass key rested in my pocket, grounding me, reminding me that for once I had chosen myself. Still, old habits die hard. Some part of me dreaded what awaited at the hospital, already rehearsing explanations, apologies I didn't actually owe. Nassau General Hospital was easy to find, the white walls glowing sterile against the island sun. As I walked down the corridor, suitcase trailing behind me, the sound of my family's voices reached me before I reached the room. Familiar tones, sharp, controlling, dismissive, carrying through the thin walls like echoes of my entire life. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped inside. The scene unfolded exactly as I had imagined. David propped in bed, pale but hardly fragile, scrolling on his phone with casual detachment. My mother hovered at his side, fussing with his pillows. My father stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, ignoring the hospital's no-cell policy. Heather arranged flowers at the sill, her face the picture of quiet martyrdom. Their reactions to me were as scripted as the roles we'd all been forced to play. My mother's eyes narrowed, her tone sharp. Nice of you to join us a full day after the emergency. I met her gaze evenly. Hi, Mom. Hi, everyone. Then to David, and how are you feeling? Better, he muttered, not looking up from his phone. They're discharging me soon. A beat passed, then his eyes flicked to mine. Where were you yesterday? Mom said she called you 100 times. 66, actually, so I corrected quietly. And I was at the Apex Awards, the ceremony I told you about months ago, the one you all promised to attend before deciding on a vacation instead. That silenced him, but not for long. My father hung up his call, frowning. This is hardly the time for that discussion, Audrey. Your brother could have died. But he didn't, I replied firmly, and according to his doctor, he was stable almost immediately. I know, because I called the hospital last night to get the facts. My mother gasped as though I'd committed an unforgivable offense. You called his doctor without consulting us? How could you? I needed the truth, I said evenly, not the panic, not the guilt, the truth. Heather's voice chimed in, dripping with judgment. So you decided your little design party was more important than being here for your family? The words hit like a slap, but instead of crumbling, something in me ignited. Years of being overlooked, minimized, dismissed. They all rose to the surface at once. I met her gaze and repeated slowly, each word deliberate. My little design party was the Apex Awards, the highest honor in my industry. An achievement I have worked toward for years. An event I begged you all to attend, only for you to abandon it for a vacation. David shifted uncomfortably. My father's expression darkened. My mother bristled. Family comes first, she snapped, her voice rising. We taught you that. No, I said, my voice steady now, my chest rising with the force of years unspoken. You taught me that David comes first. Heather comes first. Dad's work comes first, Mom's business comes first, and I am expected to sacrifice everything without complaint. That isn't family, that's favoritism dressed up as duty. The room fell silent. They stared at me, stunned, as if I had broken some sacred law by naming what had always been true. I reached into my bag and pulled out the Apex trophy, setting it firmly on the bedside table. Its crystal edges caught the fluorescent hospital light, scattering fragments of rainbow across the walls. This, I said, my voice softer but cutting, is what you missed. This is what wasn't important enough for you to show up for. And this, I gestured around the sterile room, is what you demanded I drop it all for. A situation that was under control before you even started dialing my number. No one spoke. My mother's lips trembled, her eyes filling not with understanding but indignation. My father shook his head, muttering, "Oh, you're being dramatic." Heather folded her arms. David said nothing at all. I picked up the trophy, sliding it back into my bag. I came because I chose to, but I won't apologize for valuing my work, my time, my life, not anymore. And with that, I turned toward the door, the brass key in my pocket pressing into my palm, reminding me I had already unlocked something they could never take away from me, the truth of my own worth. Back in Boston, the city air felt different. Lighter somehow, though my heart was still heavy from the confrontation in Nassau. The weight of the key in my pocket reminded me of something essential. I had a choice now. I didn't have to keep cycling through the same pattern of sacrifice and neglect. For the first time in my life, I had somewhere else to turn. The following evening, I found myself standing once again before the warehouse door in the historic district. The brick facade looked just as ordinary as it had before, but I no longer felt ordinary stepping into it. This time, I knew what lay beyond. This time, I felt ready to claim it. The key slid into the lock with the same smoothness, the same quiet click. As the heavy door swung inward, warm light spilled out, carrying the hum of voices, the rhythm of creation, the pulse of something that felt like belonging. My chest loosened, I walked through the hallway and into the vast open studio, and immediately I was greeted with smiles, nods, the kind of acknowledgement I had chased all my life and never once received at home. "Welcome back," Harold said, waiting near the entrance as if he had known I would come. I exhaled a laugh, soft but full of release. "It feels different this time." "That's because you've chosen it," he replied. It's one thing to stumble upon a door, it's another to decide to step through it." He led me to the small studio space he had shown me before, now transformed. The basic desk and chair were still there, but they had been joined by tools and materials tailored to me. A high-end computer loaded with design software sat waiting. Shelves lined with typography books and color theory guides hugged the walls. Lighting rigs had been installed, thoughtful and precise. My throat tightened. How did this happen? "Tessa remembered you admiring her lighting setup, so she donated one. James thought you'd love his old typography collection. Kenji insisted you needed a proper workstation." Harold's smile softened. Everyone contributed something. I stepped into the space slowly, touching the desk, the books, the equipment, as though they might disappear if I blinked. These people barely knew me, and yet they had built this space with intention, with care. My own family, the people who had raised me, had never shown this kind of thoughtfulness toward my passions. Tears pricked my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Harold answered gently. "Just create. That's thanks enough." Over the next weeks, the collective became my sanctuary. I came after work, sometimes staying late into the night, surrounded by others who were equally consumed by their craft. Conversations around the long communal table were unlike anything I'd known. Not shallow networking, not competitive boasting, but real, generous sharing. Someone always had an idea, a suggestion, a perspective that pushed my thinking further. When I stumbled, they encouraged. When I succeeded, they celebrated without envy. The contrast with my family was stark. My parents sent a terse email after the Bahamas trip, full of wounded disappointment in my attitude and urging me to reflect on family priorities. Heather called once, her sighs heavy with judgment, accusing me of being so difficult. David, in his quiet way, sent a brief text thanking me for coming, though it carefully avoided mentioning my award. The pattern persisted. They hadn't changed, but I had. Each evening I returned to the collective, the difference grew sharper. Here, my worth wasn't conditional, my voice wasn't ignored, my work wasn't minimized. In this converted warehouse filled with buzzing creativity, I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the overlooked sister. I was Audrey Thompson, designer, Apex Award winner, and member of something bigger than myself. The key, once a mystery, had become a talisman. I wore it on a chain around my neck, touching it whenever I felt the pull of old habits, the urge to explain myself to people unwilling to listen, the temptation to shrink so others could shine. It reminded me that I had already unlocked what I needed most, a home that wasn't given by blood but chosen by heart. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt home. It was during one of my therapy sessions that the pieces began to shift into place. Dr. Patterson had been listening quietly as I recounted the confrontation in Nassau, my voice still shaking with the adrenaline of speaking my truth. She leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but purposeful. Audrey, you've described a dynamic that feels deeply ingrained. Have you considered whether this pattern might go back further than your parents? The question lingered in my mind long after I left her office. That evening, a memory surfaced. My father once mentioned his sister Valerie, who had moved across the country decades ago. He always spoke of her with a dismissive tone, labeling her difficult, a woman who had abandoned the family. Until now, I had never questioned that narrative. But what if her story echoed mine? I found her number tucked into an old address book and dialed, unsure if she would even answer. To my surprise, her voice came warm, almost relieved. Audrey, I was hoping you'd reach out someday. We spoke for hours, the conversation peeling back layers of family history I had never known. Your grandfather was the Estomtrail. Aim Wei, she explained. He built his entire world around your father, the sun, while I could never measure up. I earned scholarships, I built a career in education, but it was never enough. Your dad could stumble, and he was still the star. When I finally set boundaries, they called me selfish, ungrateful, disloyal, so I left, and I never really went back. Her words struck me with both sadness and clarity. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. The pattern had roots that stretched back at least 3 generations. Fathers favoring sons, daughters becoming invisible, cycles of neglect and resentment repeating like an inheritance no one asked for. Your story, she said softly, isn't new in this family, but you have a chance to break it, to live differently. For the first time, I felt the heavy guilt I'd carried begin to loosen. All those years of believing I wasn't enough, that if I just worked harder, loved louder, achieved more, they would see me, suddenly reframed. It wasn't about my worth, it was about a system that had been broken long before I was born. When we hung up, I sat quietly, the key around my neck warm against my skin. I wasn't the first in my family to recognize the truth, but maybe I could be the first to stop carrying it forward. In the months that followed, my life began to transform in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. At Horizon Creative, the Apex win shifted everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just another senior designer. I was sought after, consulted, given leadership on the agency's most prestigious accounts. Clients asked for me by name. Junior designers looked to me for mentorship, eager to learn not just my technical skills, but the resilience they somehow sensed beneath them. But the deeper transformation didn't happen in boardrooms or client meetings, it happened within the collective. The warehouse became my second home, and in many ways, my first real one. Nights that might once have been spent alone at my desk were now filled with conversations that stretched into early morning hours. I sat at the communal table trading sketches and ideas with architects, painters, and musicians, their perspectives pushing my own creativity into directions I had never explored. Harold often joined me in my studio, his presence both grounding and challenging. He studied my work with a sharp eye, offering insights that sliced through my hesitations. One afternoon, after reviewing a series of drafts, he leaned back and said, Audrey, you've been designing for validation your whole life. But what would you create if the only person you needed to satisfy was yourself? The question landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting a fire I hadn't known was waiting. For years, I had shaped my work to earn approval. First from my parents, then from clients, then from an industry that often rewarded trends over truth. but with Harold's words, I felt something shift. I began experimenting with techniques I had long avoided, blending personal symbolism with commercial projects, daring to take risks that once would have terrified me. The results were immediate. My designs grew bolder, richer, more authentic. Critics and clients alike noticed the change, describing my work as having a new depth, a voice that was unmistakably mine. The Apex Trophy had validated me, but the collective gave me something greater: freedom. That freedom led to collaboration. When Lucia, the architect, and James, the typographer, approached me about submitting a proposal for the City Arts Initiative, I hesitated. Public installations were risky, scrutinized, often politicized, but together our ideas flowed easily, a fusion of architecture, typography, and visual design that celebrated the city's diverse history. We submitted our proposal without expectation. Weeks later, we learned it had been selected from dozens of entries. The night of the unveiling, I stood beside Lucia and James as city officials praised the project, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling notes. But what mattered most wasn't the publicity, it was the feeling of standing shoulder to shoulder with collaborators who valued my voice, not in spite of who I was, but because of it. Recognition came quickly after that. A leading design publication featured our installation, highlighting the remarkable evolution of my work since the Apex win. Soon after, I was nominated for another award. This time not for client work, but for the public installation itself. Harold found me in the studio the evening the nomination was announced. "Will your family attend this one?" he asked gently. I smiled, the answer clear before the words left my lips. "I haven't invited them. Instead, I've reserved seats for you, Eleanor, Lucia, and James, my chosen family, the people who truly see me." The night of the ceremony, I entered the Grand Meridian Hotel with a calm certainty I had never known before. There were no empty chairs waiting to mock me, no frantic glances toward an absent family. Instead, Harold's silver hair gleamed in the front row, Eleanor elegant beside him, Lucia and James deep in animated conversation. The people who mattered were there. When my name was called as the winner, the standing ovation that rose from them filled me in a way no applause from strangers ever could. For the first time, recognition didn't feel hollow, it felt whole. 1 year after Harold pressed that mysterious brass key into my palm, I stood in my studio at the Collective, morning light streaming across walls now lined with my own work. Not just client projects, but deeply personal pieces. Bold, unapologetic, infused with the voice I had finally allowed to emerge. The studio had become more than a workplace, it was a reflection of who I had become. Eon, no longer defined by absence, but by presence, by belonging, by choice. My family still existed in my life, but on new terms, short phone calls with my parents twice a month, polite but distant. Holiday gatherings attended when my schedule permitted, no longer a battlefield of unspoken wounds, but carefully navigated territory with clear boundaries. Heather remained tethered to my parents' values, though occasionally she asked cautious questions about my projects as though curious about a freedom she didn't quite dare claim. David surprised me the most. He came to one of my gallery exhibitions unannounced, awkward but earnest. For the first time, he admitted he had begun to see the patterns I had named: favoritism, neglect, cycles passed down through generations. We spoke honestly, not as rivals, but as siblings finally glimpsing truth. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Yet no matter how those ties shifted, the Collective remained my anchor. Here, I wasn't struggling to be seen. I was seen. I wasn't working for scraps of recognition. I was celebrated. This community became my chosen family, the one I had never imagined but always needed. That year, as I walked through the lobby of another award ceremony, I noticed a young designer standing off to the side. Her portfolio case clutched tightly in her arms, her chin lifted with determination despite the sheen of tears in her eyes. Something in her posture was achingly familiar. The same loneliness I had carried, the same desperate hope for recognition that might never come from the people she longed for most. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside were several replica keys, gifts from Eleanor when I had grown into a mentor myself. I pressed one into the young woman's palm, slipping my card alongside it. Sometimes, I told her, echoing the words Harold had once given me, the recognition we need doesn't come from where we expect it. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., that key will open more than just a door. Her eyes widened, confusion mixing with hope, the same expression I must have worn a year earlier. As she walked away, clutching the key as if it might burn, Harold appeared at my side. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "The circle continues," and he said quietly. I touched the key pendant that now hung around my neck, its familiar weight warm against my skin. "Home," I murmured, "isn't always where we start. Sometimes it's where we're reborn." Later that night, back in my apartment, I looked at 2 framed photographs on my wall. One held my blood family, frozen in stiff smiles, a reminder of the complicated ties that shaped me but could never define me. The other showed the collective at our holiday gathering. Harold at the center, Eleanor radiant, Lucia and James laughing, and me among them, not on the edges, but fully inside the frame. The brass key glinted softly against my chest. It wasn't just a key to a door or a studio or even a community. It was the key to myself, to the life I had built when I stopped chasing the impossible approval of those who could not give it. And with that realization, I understood, belonging isn't inherited, it's chosen, and sometimes the key has been in your hands all along, just waiting for you to open the right door.